Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. There are silences that hold more terror than any scream. Tonight, we open a file that was never meant to be seen, a record sealed under the highest levels of national security. It details an event with no survivors, no witnesses, and most unnervingly, no damage. This is the suppressed case file of the Sentinel Point Anomaly, an incident where an entire community ceased to exist, leaving everything behind as if its people simply dissolved into the air. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some places are not meant to be found, and some silences are not meant to be broken. It begins, as these things so often do, in the sterile quiet of the pre-dawn hours. 4:17 a.m. In a regional emergency monitoring center, 100 miles from anywhere that matters, a single red light begins to blink. It's not an alarm, not a fire, not a security breach, not a natural disaster. It is a status light, one of hundreds on a vast, outdated board that has been green for 37 years. The light corresponds to Municipal Substation 7, the primary data relay for the isolated mountain town of Havenwood, population 1,284. The dispatcher, a man named Arthur Bellweather, a veteran of night shifts and false alarms, notes the change in his log. He doesn't think much of it. A momentary glitch, a power flicker. He initiates a standard remote diagnostic. The system responds instantly. All systems nominal. Yet, the light remains red. A contradiction. At 4:19 a.m., he runs it again. All systems nominal. Red. He picks up the phone and dials the Havenwood Sheriff's Department, a number he knows by heart, but has rarely used. The line is open. There is no ringtone, no busy signal, no recorded message. There is only a perfect, seamless, digital silence. It's a silence so absolute it feels manufactured. He hangs up and tries the town's fire department. The same dead air. The mayor's office. A gas station that runs 24/7. The local clinic. Silence. 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 Every line into Havenwood is open but utterly quiet. It's as if the town's entire telecommunications network has been surgically muted. At 4:28 a.m., Arthur Bellweather, a man not prone to panic, feels a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He overrides the standard protocol and triggers a Level 3 communications blackout alert, flagging it for state-level review. He makes a final log entry, his handwriting, usually so steady, now slightly shaky. Havenwood. Status. Unknown. No voice or data transmission. All lines open but silent. Requesting immediate welfare check. He doesn't know it, but his log entry is the last official document to ever refer to Havenwood as a simple town. From this moment forward, it would only be known by a classified designation, Incident Zone H14. The call for a welfare check would be answered, but not by the state troopers he expected. The response that was coming was faster, heavier, and infinitely more secretive. Because somewhere, in a much deeper, darker part of the government, that single red light wasn't just a communications failure, it was a tripwire. The first to arrive were not the clandestine forces that would later seal the town from the world, but a pair of state troopers from a neighboring county, Sergeant Mills and Deputy Fletcher. Their patrol car rolled over the town line at 5:43 a.m., just as the sun began to bleed over the jagged peaks of the surrounding mountains. What they found was not chaos, but an unnerving, profound order. The town of Havenwood was pristine, perfect. It was as if someone had hit a universal pause button at the exact same moment for every single resident. In the center of town, the traffic lights cycled from green to yellow to red, directing non-existent traffic. Lawns were manicured, newspapers lay on porches, and garden sprinklers hissed in rhythmic, automated arcs. A child's bicycle lay on its side in a driveway, its front wheel still spinning lazily from a phantom push. Mills and Fletcher proceeded with caution, their voices hushed as if in a cathedral. They cleared the first house on Main Street. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the television was on, broadcasting a morning news program to an empty living room. In the kitchen, a coffee pot was still warm, a half-full mug sitting on the counter beside it, a faint wisp of steam rising from its surface. There was no sign of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no hint of violence or panic. It was simply empty. They checked every room. Closets were full of clothes, beds were unmade as if recently slept in, and wallets and keys sat on nightstands. They moved to the next house, and the next. The scene repeated with chilling fidelity. A family dinner sat on a dining table, plates half-eaten. A dog's leash lay by a back door, its water bowl full. A car in an open garage had its radio playing softly, the keys still in the ignition. The entire town was a perfectly preserved tableau of life, interrupted mid-moment. It was a ghost town, but not one of decay and abandonment. It was a town frozen in amber, every minute detail of its last second of life captured and held in a terrifying stasis. Sergeant Mills, a man of 20 years on the force, would later state in a heavily redacted debriefing that the most unsettling part was the complete lack of any sound. No birdsong, no barking dogs, no distant hum of refrigerators or air conditioning units. The only sounds were those he and his partner made themselves, their boots echoing unnaturally on the pavement. They had entered a town with no survivors, but also a town with absolutely no damage, no bodies, and no clues. At 6:12 a.m., Mills used his encrypted long-range radio to contact dispatch. His message was brief and laced with a deep, primal confusion. "Dispatch, this is Mills. You're not going to believe this. There's no one here. The whole town, it's just gone." Sergeant Mills's confused transmission was the last piece of civilian communication to escape Havenwood. Within 90 minutes, the official response began, and it was nothing like a standard emergency protocol. It was a military operation. Unmarked black helicopters, devoid of any insignia, descended on the hills surrounding the town. Convoys of drab, olive-green trucks rumbled up the single mountain road, carrying not paramedics or investigators, but soldiers in full tactical gear, their faces obscured by gas masks and helmets. They were efficient, silent, and absolute. The first thing they established was the perimeter. A 5-mile radius around Havenwood was declared a no-fly zone and a federal exclusion area. State troopers Mills and Fletcher were intercepted, debriefed in a mobile command unit, and forced to sign national security non-disclosure agreements, so binding they effectively erased the morning from their official lives. They were ordered to forget what they saw. The official story, disseminated to the handful of regional news outlets that even knew Havenwood existed, was a sudden and catastrophic chemical leak from an old, forgotten mine shaft. A mandatory evacuation was in effect, they said. The area was unsafe for decades to come. It was a clean, simple lie designed to quell curiosity and prevent panic. But for the few families living in the rural outskirts who were forcibly relocated with generous but non-negotiable compensation packages, the truth felt far more sinister. They saw the convoys. They saw the soldiers whose uniforms bore no flags or unit patches. They saw mobile sensor arrays being erected, pointing not outwards to detect threats, but inwards, towards the silent town. This was not a containment operation for a chemical spill. It was a quarantine. The wall of silence was built with bureaucratic precision. All public records pertaining to Havenwood, census data, property deeds, tax records, were reclassified at the highest level. Digital maps were subtly altered, removing the town's name, turning it into an unnamed patch of forest. Any journalist who tried to dig deeper found their inquiries stonewalled by federal agencies they'd never heard of. The message was clear. Havenwood is off-limits. It no longer exists. The perimeter was absolute, a hard line between the known world and the anomaly within. For the men guarding it, it was a surreal and unnerving assignment. They were to let nothing in, and more importantly, to report if anything came out. They stood watch over a town that was perfectly visible, its lights even coming on automatically as dusk fell, painting a picture of quaint, small-town life. But it was a portrait with no people, a stage for a play that would never be performed. The silence from within the perimeter was the most unnerving part. It was a dead zone, both electronically and audibly, a void on the map that was beginning to feel like a wound in the world. Behind the newly erected wall of silence, a different kind of operation was underway. This was not a mission for soldiers or scientists in the traditional sense. This required a specialized unit, one whose existence is not officially acknowledged. They were called the Anomaly Response Team, or AIRT. Their call sign for this operation? Stasis. Their mission, as outlined in a leaked, partially redacted briefing document, was to enter, assess, and quantify the H-14 event without compromising subject integrity. In layman's terms, go in, figure out what happened, and don't touch anything unless absolutely necessary. The 6-person team entered Havenwood at 2200 hours, under the cover of darkness. They were clad not in bulky hazmat suits, but in sleek, dark environmental suits, their helmets equipped with a suite of advanced sensory equipment. They moved like ghosts through the silent streets, their progress monitored in real time from a mobile command post miles away. Their initial findings only deepened the mystery. Every reading was normal. Air quality, radiation levels, temperature, barometric pressure, all were exactly as they should be for a cool autumn night in the mountains. There was no chemical agent, no biological pathogen, no lingering energy signature. There was simply nothing. The team's audio logs, which we've acquired through a trusted source, paint a chilling picture of psychological disorientation. Team lead Stasis 1 can be heard describing the scene. Command, this is Stasis 1. We are inside the primary school. The building is clear. It's exactly like the initial report. The lights are on. There are half-finished drawings on the desks in the art room. A janitor's cart is in the hallway, bucket still full of water. We are detecting 0 biological signatures. No humans, no animals, not even insects. I repeat, 0 invertebrate life signs. The ecosystem has collapsed. This was a new, terrifying discovery. It wasn't just the people who were gone. It was every living creature. The birds in the trees, the fish in the streams, the squirrels, the deer, even the ants in the ground. The entire biosphere within the town's limits had been surgically and silently excised from existence. The team moved from building to building, their sophisticated equipment confirming the impossible reality over and over. They were in a place that defied all known physics and biology. It was a town without life, but also without death. There were no bodies to recover, no graves to dig. There was only the profound, suffocating evidence of 1,284 lives, plus an entire ecosystem that had been present one second and gone the next. As the night wore on, the team's mission shifted from assessment to a desperate search for the epicenter, the ground zero of the event. They followed a logic that suggested whatever had happened must have a source. And just before their scheduled extraction, they found it. In the basement of the town library, one of the team's sensors began to register a faint, anomalous reading. It wasn't energy, it wasn't radiation, it was something else, something their instruments weren't designed to measure. It was a distortion, a flicker, in reality itself. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. When the first state troopers rolled into the town of Havenwood, Colorado, on the morning of October 27th, it was in response to a communications blackout, a dead zone, not a single call in or out for over 6 hours. They expected to find a downed cell tower, maybe a severed fiber optic line. What they found instead was a town under a silent, invisible quarantine. The scene was not one of chaos, but of unnerving, impossible stillness. Cars were parked in driveways, some with doors ajar. The morning paper lay on front porches, untouched. Inside the homes, the tableau was even more disturbing. Televisions were left on, casting a flickering blue light into empty living rooms. Coffee pots were half full, still warm. In one home, a bowl of cereal sat on a kitchen table, the milk just beginning to soak into the flakes. A child's homework was spread out, an equation half finished. Everything was in its place, except for the people. All 1,284 residents of Havenwood had vanished. The initial search was methodical, then frantic. Law enforcement swept every house, every business, every wooded acre surrounding the town. They found no one, not a single person, living or dead. There were no signs of a struggle, no forced entry, no blood, no ransacked rooms. It was as if every man, woman, and child had simply ceased to exist in the middle of a breath. The FBI's hostage rescue team was brought in, followed by hazmat crews in full containment suits. They scanned for radiation, for chemical agents, for biological threats. Their sensors returned nothing but baseline readings. Geologists checked for seismic anomalies. There were none. Meteorologists confirmed the weather had been calm. Every conventional explanation was systematically dismantled by the sheer, overwhelming lack of evidence. An investigator's preliminary report, later redacted but leaked by an anonymous source, coined a term that would come to define the case: a negative space crime scene. The evidence wasn't what was there, it was what wasn't. The absence of damage was the most damning clue of all. How do you erase over 1,000 people without breaking a single window? Without leaving a single footprint? The town of Havenwood wasn't a crime scene, it was an exhibit. A perfectly preserved diorama of a moment in time, with its most vital component surgically and inexplicably removed. The silence in that valley wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the sound of an answered question that no one had dared to ask. Within 48 hours, Havenwood was no longer a town. It was a laboratory. Under the guise of a chemical spill, A military cordon was established, miles wide. No one entered or left without the highest levels of clearance. Inside this perimeter, a new kind of investigation began, one that had no precedent. This wasn't about finding a suspect. It was about defining the parameters of an impossible event. Teams of scientists, physicists from Los Alamos, sociologists from DARPA, data analysts from the NSA, descended upon the silent streets. Their task was monumental: to catalog everything. Every object, every position, every last piece of data left behind in the digital and physical world of Havenwood. They weren't just bagging evidence. They were attempting to reconstruct the last nanosecond of a town's existence. The data they collected was as bizarre as it was voluminous. They documented what they called stasis artifacts, small, localized instances where the laws of physics appeared to have been momentarily suspended. A plume of steam from a kettle that had condensed onto a window pane, yet the kettle itself was cold. A basketball, mid-bounce on the high school court, resting perfectly on its side, defying gravity. A child's swing in a backyard, captured by a security camera, swaying gently for 3 hours in completely still air, before finally stopping. Each of these data points was a contradiction, a glitch in reality. The most significant finding came from the town's atomic clocks. The local bank, the school, and a dedicated amateur radio operator all maintained hyper-accurate timekeepers. All three were perfectly synchronized, but all three had recorded a temporal anomaly, a hiccup of 7.2 microseconds that was not registered by any other atomic clock on the planet. It was a time signature for the event, a moment when Havenwood had briefly, imperceptibly, disconnected from the rest of the world's timeline. This effort, codenamed Operation Sundown, became a maddening exercise in proving a negative. The scientists were cataloging an absence. They created terabytes of data demonstrating the town's perfect, pristine condition. They were building a mountain of evidence to prove that nothing had happened, even as they stood in the ruins of 1,284 lives. The impossible truth began to emerge. Whatever force had struck Havenwood, it wasn't a weapon of destruction. It was a tool of extraction, operating with a precision that bordered on the divine, or the profoundly alien. In the digital age, people don't just disappear. They leave echoes, a trail of electrons, a whisper in the machine. And so the full weight of the nation's signals intelligence apparatus was brought to bear on Havenwood's electronic ghost. Analysts at Fort Meade were tasked with sifting through the final moments of the town's digital life, searching for a cause, a warning, a final goodbye. What they found was far more unsettling. A wall of absolute, instantaneous silence. The final text messages were achingly mundane. Don't forget the milk. See you tomorrow. LOL. A teenager's social media post, a picture of a cat, was uploaded at 2:16 a.m. Then, at precisely 2:17:04 a.m., everything stopped. Not a gradual decline, but a digital guillotine. Every cell phone call, every data packet, every Wi-Fi signal, every landline, every single stream of information originating from within the Havenwood Valley ceased at the exact same moment. One 911 call, logged at 2:16:58 a.m., became a key piece of evidence. The caller, a frantic woman, reported strange lights in the sky above Black Ridge. Before she could describe them further, the operator heard a sound, a low, resonant, pulsating hum. It lasted for 5 seconds. Then, the line went dead. That hum became the Rosetta Stone of the investigation. Audio technicians isolated it from the recording. It was a complex, layered sound, with a fundamental frequency so low it was almost infrasound. It did not match any known engine, natural phenomenon, or electronic interference. It was captured on 2 other devices in town: a baby monitor and a security camera's microphone at a gas station. 3 different locations, 3 different devices, all recording the same impossible sound in the final seconds. This became known as the Havenwood hum. Analysis of the town's infrastructure only deepened the mystery. The power grid was stable, with no record of a surge or a brownout. The fiber optic lines were pristine. The cell tower was fully operational. The equipment was all there, powered on, waiting for a signal that would never come again. The digital silence was absolute. It was as if a switch had been thrown, not on the town's power, but on its very ability to communicate with the outside world. The people of Havenwood didn't just vanish from their homes, they were erased from the electromagnetic spectrum. The last transmission was not a scream for help, but a strange mechanical hum, the sound of the machine that was about to unmake their world. For years, the official narrative surrounding Havenwood was a carefully constructed fiction, a tragic but explainable industrial accident, a toxic gas leak that necessitated a permanent quarantine. But in the shadowed world of classified intelligence, a different story was told. A story pieced together from heavily redacted documents, deathbed confessions, and whispers from those who dared to speak. The story of Project Nightfall. Perched high in the mountains overlooking the valley was the Black Ridge Observatory. To the public, it was a defunct university research station. In reality, it was the nerve center for one of the most secret and ambitious government projects in history. Project Nightfall was not about weapons of mass destruction. Its purpose was far more fundamental. Leaked internal memos refer to it as resonant frequency manipulation and quantum state decoherence. In layman's terms, they were trying to build a device that could tune into the specific frequency of a given type of matter, and for a lack of a better word, unexist it. Their initial targets were simple: inorganic compounds, specific alloys. The goal was a new form of strategic denial, the ability to make an enemy's tanks or runways simply cease to be, without an explosion, without radiation, without a trace. On the night of October 27th, the lead scientists of Project Nightfall, under immense pressure from their Department of Defense overseers, initiated the first large-scale field test. Their target was a specific quartz deposit deep underground, miles from Havenwood. They activated the device. The Havenwood hum was the sound of Project Nightfall's primary resonant emitter, spooling up to full power. But their calculations were wrong. There was an unforeseen harmonic, a cascade effect. The frequency they used to target the quartz had a biological echo, a sympathetic resonance with complex carbon-based life. The beam didn't just target the rock, it targeted everything that shared its fundamental resonant signature. It didn't destroy. It didn't kill. It simply removed. The result was a terrifying success and an unimaginable failure. They had proven their technology worked on a scale they had never dreamed possible. They had also committed mass murder, or something far stranger, on 1,284 innocent civilians. The cover-up was swift and absolute. The project was scrubbed. The facility was abandoned. The personnel were scattered, their records sealed or erased. The official story of a gas leak was disseminated through controlled media channels. But the truth remains, buried in classified archives and in the silent, empty streets of Havenwood, a town sacrificed on the altar of forbidden science. The question is no longer what happened to the people of Havenwood, but whether the technology that erased them is still out there, waiting to be tuned to a new frequency. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some places are not just forgotten, they are erased. Welcome back to the Obsidian Archive. In our last chapter, we established the fundamental, terrifying paradox of the Sentinel Point event, a complete and total loss of life with absolutely zero structural or environmental damage. A town of 117 souls, gone. The buildings, the streets, the trees, untouched, as if preserved in amber. The official report, filed 6 months later under the joint authority of the Department of Energy and FEMA, tells a very different, very convenient story. Document 734 Alpha, heavily redacted but partially declassified in 1998, attributes the incident to a sudden, catastrophic atmospheric inversion event, coupled with a subterranean release of a previously undiscovered, naturally occurring neurotoxic gas. The narrative is almost poetic in its simplicity. A silent, invisible killer rising from the earth, suffocating the entire populace in their homes, their cars, their beds. No explosion, no fire, no chaos. Just a quiet, collective death. It's clean, it's clinical, and it is a flammable lie. The first inconsistency burns away the moment you apply basic science. The gas they described, a theoretical argon-xenon compound, would be heavier than air. It would have settled in basements and low-lying areas, yet victims were found on the second stories of their homes. It would have left clear chemical traces in the soil and water table. Extensive independent testing of smuggled samples showed nothing. Absolutely pristine. Then there's the matter of the first responders. The report claims they arrived to a scene of eerie silence, but initial dispatch logs, which we acquired from a county source before they were scrubbed, tell of panicked calls from the perimeter. Not about bodies, but about distortions, flickering lights where there was no power, radios emitting pure static that seemed to have a rhythm. One deputy reported seeing the town's welcome sign shimmering like a heat haze on a cold day. These reports were later officially dismissed as stress-induced hallucinations. But the most damning evidence against the official narrative is the complete lack of biological decay. The bodies, when they were eventually removed by a specialized unit in full hazmat gear, showed no signs of conventional asphyxiation. Medical examiners, whose preliminary findings were immediately classified, noted a peculiar cellular state. It wasn't death as we know it. The cells weren't decaying. They were inert. A state of absolute stasis, down to the microbial level. A gas doesn't do that. A weather event doesn't do that. The government sold the world a story about a freak of nature. But the evidence doesn't point to a natural event. It points to an unnatural stop, a switch being flipped. The official narrative wasn't an explanation. It was a wall built of paper and ink to hide the impossible truth of what really happened at Sentinel Point. The lies of the official report were designed for public consumption, a tranquilizer for a curious press. But behind the curtain of national security, a very different investigation was underway. We know this because of the Kestrel Memo, a single-page document leaked from a DARPA subcontractor in the early 2000s. It doesn't speak of gas leaks or weather inversions. It speaks of anomalous spectrometry readings and a localized zero-point energy cascade. These are not terms of geology or meteorology. They are the language of theoretical physics, of science fiction made terrifyingly real. Spectrometry is the analysis of light and other forms of radiation. When the specialized teams moved into Sentinel Point, they weren't just collecting bodies, they were collecting data. The Kestrel memo details readings from the area that are, to put it mildly, impossible. Materials within the zone, concrete, wood, glass, showed an atomic signature that had been altered. The elemental composition was the same, but the quantum spin of the electrons was uniformly flattened. It was as if every atom in the town had been paused in the exact same quantum state. This uniformity is never seen in nature. It was artificial. It was absolute. This leads us to the most chilling phrase in the memo: zero-point field. In quantum mechanics, the zero-point field is the lowest possible energy state that a physical system can possess. It is the energy of a perfect vacuum, the baseline of reality itself. The theory, popular in black projects and fringe science, is that if you could manipulate this field, you could manipulate reality. You could, for instance, create energy from nothing. Or more terrifyingly, you could return matter to nothing. The memo postulates that Sentinel Point was not struck by a weapon in the conventional sense. It was enveloped by a bubble, a localized field that momentarily and selectively canceled out the quantum energy that animates biological life. It didn't kill people. It switched them off. It didn't burn buildings or shatter glass because its target was not crude physical matter, but the complex electrical and quantum processes that constitute life and consciousness. This explains the no-damage paradox. An explosion is a chaotic release of energy. This was the opposite. It was a controlled surgical removal of energy. The memo suggests the event lasted no more than 400 milliseconds, a blink of an eye. In that blink, every living thing above the complexity of a bacterium was simply halted, ceased. Their physical forms remained perfect and undamaged, but the spark was gone, excised from the equation of reality, with impossible precision. The question is no longer what killed the people of Sentinel Point. The question is, who or what wields a technology that can edit life out of existence, leaving behind a perfectly preserved, silent tomb? For 30 years, Arthur Bellweather has lived in self-imposed exile in the Nevada desert. In 1993, he was a senior air traffic controller at the regional command, a man whose entire world was the calm, orderly procession of lights on a radar screen. On the night of the Sentinel Point event, that order was shattered. We spoke with him on the condition of anonymity, his voice altered to protect his identity. You don't forget a thing like that, ever. It was a quiet night, post-midnight shift. Sentinel Point wasn't in our direct airspace, but we monitored the sector. It had a small power station, a municipal tower. It was a blip, a tiny stable cluster of ground returns. At 01:13 a.m., it vanished. And when I say vanished, I don't mean it fizzled out. I don't mean there was a flash or a debris cloud like a bomb. One radar sweep, it was there. The next sweep, 6 seconds later, there was nothing. A perfect black hole on the ground clutter map. Arthur immediately flagged the anomaly. He checked his equipment. It was functioning perfectly. He cross-referenced with satellite data. The connection to the Sentinel Point weather station had gone dead at the exact same instant. There was no power surge, no final transmission, just silence. My supervisor told me it was a power outage, a grid failure. But a grid failure doesn't make a town disappear from radar. The metal buildings, the water tower, they should still reflect a signal. But they didn't. It was like the ground itself had gone smooth as glass. I tried to raise the local sheriff's department on the radio. Nothing. Just static. Not normal static either. It was clean, pure, a dead frequency. Within the hour, Arthur's world turned upside down. Two men, not in military uniform, but in dark, nondescript suits, entered the control center. They didn't have clearance, but no one stopped them. They walked directly to his station, asked him to stand, and took every log, every tape, every note he had made. They never raised their voices. They simply told him that what he saw was a classified military equipment test, and that he was now bound by the National Security Act. He was to forget everything. They told me I saw a sensor ghost, Arthur recalls, his voice cracking. They said if I ever mentioned the ground returns disappearing, I'd be facing a federal tribunal. They had me sign a dozen documents. I didn't even read them. You don't say no to men like that. 2 days later, I was transferred to a desk job in another state. My career was over. They didn't just silence me. They buried me in paperwork. Arthur's testimony is the human key to the entire event. He is the witness not to a gas leak, but to an erasure. His radar screen showed the impossible truth. A town didn't die. A town was deleted. A cover-up is one thing, a lie, a misdirection, a burying of files. What happened to Sentinel Point after the event was something else entirely. It was a systematic top-down effort not just to hide the truth, but to erase a place from collective memory. We call it the redaction mandate. The process began within 72 hours. The entire area, a 50-square-mile perimeter around the town, was declared a permanent federal exclusion zone. The official reason given was ongoing seismic instability. It was a lie, but a brilliant one. It justified the military presence and the indefinite quarantine without ever having to mention contamination or a specific threat. But they didn't stop there. Over the next decade, a quiet, digital war was waged against the memory of Sentinel Point. We hired a data forensics expert to track the changes. Old geological survey maps available on university servers were digitally altered. The slight elevation that marked the town was smoothed over. Online county archives had their records surgically excised. Birth certificates, property deeds, business licenses for Sentinel Point residents. All began to return 404 errors. They were not just classified, they were deleted from the servers. Even physical records were targeted. Librarians in 3 states reported visits from federal agents who recalled specific county atlases and historical texts for archival preservation. These books were never returned. We found one of the original atlases they missed in a small town library's basement. In the 1992 edition, Sentinel Point is clearly marked. In the 1994 edition, the space it occupied is empty forest. The road leading to it, mysteriously gone. This was a level of control that is difficult to comprehend. It implies a coordinated effort across dozens of agencies, both public and private. They were rewriting history in real time. Why? Why go to such extraordinary lengths? A gas leak, no matter how tragic, does not require the erasure of a town from maps. A military accident does not warrant scrubbing census data. The scale of the cover-up is directly proportional to the magnitude of the secret being kept. They weren't just hiding an event. They were trying to contain a concept. The idea that a place, and everyone in it, could be unplugged from reality. Perhaps they were afraid the public would panic, Or perhaps they were afraid that whatever happened at Sentinel Point was not a one-time event. Perhaps they were afraid it was a test. And by erasing the location, they were trying to hide the test site from whoever or whatever was conducting the experiment. The redaction mandate proves one thing beyond any doubt. The architects of this secrecy are terrified. And what terrifies them should terrify us all. In the sanitized official narrative of the Oakhaven incident, there are no heroes and no villains. There are only unknowns and accepted losses. But buried deep within the archives, under layers of redaction and bureaucratic denial, lies one name that refuses to be erased: Dr. Evelyn Reed. In the late 1970s, Reed was a rising star in theoretical physics, a mind so brilliant it was said she didn't just understand the universe, she could hear it whispering its secrets. But she heard a secret so profound, so terrifying, that it would not only end her career, but cast her into the shadows of history as a heretic. While official investigative bodies were scrambling for conventional explanations, a silent nerve agent, a localized atmospheric anomaly, even mass hysteria, Dr. Reed was working from a different set of first principles. She was sent the preliminary data package, the geological surveys showing no seismic activity, the atmospheric reports showing no chemical traces, the eerie reconnaissance photos of a town frozen in time, untouched, but utterly empty. Where others saw a dead end, Reed saw a doorway. She locked herself in her university office for 72 hours, fueled by coffee and a terrifying clarity. When she emerged, she presented a single 12-page paper to the Oversight Committee. It was titled, "A Hypothesis on Localized Ontological Failure." It would become her professional suicide note. Her theory, which colleagues would later mockingly call the Reed evanescence, proposed something that defied the very foundations of classical physics. She argued that this was not an event of destruction, but of subtraction. The residents of Oakhaven, along with every living organism down to the microbial level within the 3-mile radius, did not die. They were, in her words, decohered from the baseline reality. She proposed that a highly specific, unknown energy field had passed through the area, a field that resonated only with the quantum instability inherent in complex organic life. It didn't destroy matter. It simply untethered it from existence. It was a clean, silent, and absolute erasure. The committee was appalled. They called it science fiction, an academic's fever dream. They demanded evidence. She had none, only the glaring absence of it. The lack of damage is the evidence, she argued, her voice trembling with conviction. The perfect preservation of the inorganic environment is the fingerprint of the phenomenon. They stripped her of her security clearance that afternoon. Her research grants were revoked within the week. Her paper was classified at a level far beyond top secret, and all copies were ordered destroyed. Dr. Evelyn Reed, the woman who might have held the key, was publicly discredited, labeled unstable, and forced into an early retirement from which she never returned. But her forbidden hypothesis did not disappear. It festered in the darkness of the archives, a ghost in the machine, waiting for someone to find it. Because what the committee didn't know, and what Evelyn Reed could only suspect, was that her theory didn't just explain what happened at Oakhaven. It predicted that it could, and would, happen again. To understand the terrifying elegance of Dr. Reed's hypothesis, we must step away from the world we see and into the world that truly is, the strange, probabilistic realm of quantum mechanics. At its heart is a concept known as quantum coherence. Imagine a coin spinning in the air. While it's spinning, it is not heads and it is not tails. It exists in a superposition of both states at once. Only when it interacts with the environment, when it lands on the table, is it forced to choose a state. This forcing is called decoherence. It's what makes our solid, predictable world possible. Every atom in your body, every particle that makes up you, is constantly undergoing this process, tethering itself to our shared reality trillions of times per second. Now take this concept and apply it to the Oakhaven incident. Dr. Reed's theory posited the existence of an external force, a null coherence field, that acted as the ultimate environmental interaction. But instead of forcing the spinning coin to land on heads or tails, it simply stopped it from landing at all. It didn't just remove the coin from the table, it removed it from the very concept of the game. This is the core of localized ontological failure. The field that swept through Oakhaven was perfectly tuned. It ignored the simple, stable quantum states of inorganic matter, the concrete of the buildings, the steel of the cars, the glass in the windows. These were the table, too macroscopically stable to be affected. But complex biological systems, human beings, animals, plants, are a different matter entirely. Life is a chaotic, impossibly intricate dance of quantum uncertainty. We are, at our most fundamental level, walking thinking towers of spinning coins. Reed believed the null coherence field acted as a universal stop command for this biological dance. It didn't kill. Killing is a messy physical process. It leaves evidence. This was something else. It was a fundamental disentanglement from the fabric of space-time. The consciousness, the memories, the biological processes, every quantum system that constituted a living being within the zone was instantaneously and simultaneously forced into a final null state, a state of non-existence. This is why there was no damage, no screams, no struggle. The lights in the houses remained on. The televisions continued to play. A half-eaten meal on a dinner table grew cold, untouched. The inorganic world continued as if nothing had happened, because from its perspective, nothing had. The people were not gone. In a terrifying, metaphysical sense, they had simply never been. The implications were staggering, and this is why her paper was buried so deep. It suggested that reality, our very existence, was conditional. It implied that we are all just quantum states that could, with the right push, be resolved to zero. It turned the universe from a home into a haunted house, where at any moment, a silent, unseen wave could erase you from the equation, leaving no remainder. In the initial sweep of Oakhaven, forensics teams collected thousands of potential pieces of evidence, but almost all of it was useless. It was a town of mundane artifacts, a museum of interrupted lives. But in a small bungalow on Maple Street, a forensics officer found a 35mm camera sitting on a porch railing, its lens cap off, pointed towards the center of town. It felt like a long shot, but in an investigation with no leads, every possibility had to be exhausted. The roll of film was carefully extracted and sent to a secure government lab. The results were profoundly disappointing. 23 of the 24 exposures were blank. Not dark, not overexposed, simply blank, as if the film had never been used. But the final frame, number 24, was different. It was a milky, fogged gray with strange, fractal-like patterns spider-webbing across the emulsion. It looked like a catastrophic development error. Most analysts dismissed it. But one senior technician, a man who had spent 30 years looking at chemical reactions on film, saw something unnatural. He argued that the patterns weren't random. They were too structured, too symmetrical. The photograph, designated Item 734 Alpha, became an object of intense study. Using electron microscopes and spectrographic analysis, the lab team made a chilling discovery. The silver halide crystals in the film's emulsion hadn't been exposed to light. They had been fundamentally altered at a subatomic level. The strange, web-like patterns were a physical record of the silver atoms being forced into a quantum spin state that physicists had previously only theorized could exist. It was a photograph, not of an image, but of an event that had changed the very nature of the matter used to record it. Years later, a copy of the analysis was secretly leaked to a small team at MIT, who cross-referenced the patterns with their database of theoretical physics models. They found only one match: a discarded, obscure simulation of a decoherence cascade, part of a research paper authored by a then-disgraced Dr. Evelyn Reed. The photograph was a direct, physical confirmation of her forbidden hypothesis. It was a picture of the null coherence field itself as it passed through the camera. The 23 blank frames were the moments after the event where nothing existed to be photographed. But frame 24 had captured the wave in motion. It was the most important and terrifying piece of evidence in human history. It proved that reality could be edited. The original photograph and all related analyses were immediately locked away in a subterranean vault, its existence denied. It was the smoking gun for a crime with no weapon and no victims, only absences. It was a single gray, fogged frame that showed the face of God, or something that had taken its place. The official story solidified within a month of the Oakhaven incident. A train derailment, a catastrophic leak of an experimental industrial solvent that had rendered the ground permanently toxic. The government condemned the land. Chain link fences went up, then concrete walls topped with razor wire. Warning signs were posted, citing hazardous material and geological instability. The Oakhaven incident was over. The Oakhaven quarantine zone was born. For over 4 decades, this 3-mile radius has been a black hole on the map, a testament to the power of sustained disinformation. Military patrols, armed with protocols far exceeding those for a simple chemical spill, guard its perimeter day and night. A silent 5-mile-wide no-fly zone is ruthlessly enforced above it. All satellite imagery of the area is digitally scrubbed from public access, replaced with outdated photos of a serene, empty forest. But secrecy, like a vacuum, begs to be filled. Whispers among the guards speak of strange equipment being moved in under the cover of darkness. Not hazmat suits and geological drills, but massive antennae, superconducting magnets, and devices that hum with an unnatural energy. They speak of scientists who enter the zone for 6-month rotations and come out changed, quiet, and haunted, refusing to speak of their work. Urban explorers and conspiracy theorists who have attempted to breach the perimeter have vanished without a trace. Their last blog posts or video snippets show nothing but a quiet, overgrown town, but their audio recordings sometimes contain a low, pervasive hum that analysts cannot identify. The most disturbing rumors, however, come from declassified seismic data. Several times a year, sensors around the globe detect a pulse originating from the zone's center. It isn't seismic, nor is it magnetic. It is a type of energy for which we have no name, a brief shudder in the fabric of space-time itself. Dr. Reed's hypothesis predicted this. She theorized the event may have left a scar on reality, a lingering weakness. Is the government studying the phenomenon? Or, in a terrifying escalation, are they trying to replicate it? Are they trying to weaponize nothingness? The exclusion zone is not a tomb preserving the memory of a tragedy. It is an active laboratory. The question is no longer what happened to the people of Oakhaven. The question is what is being learned from their absence. The secrecy is not to protect us from a past event, but to blind us to an ongoing one. And as the decades pass, small, hushed reports of other Oakhaven-style events, a remote village in Siberia, a research outpost in Antarctica, a single city block in a bustling metropolis, are quickly and efficiently erased from the public record. The zone is not just a place, it is a precedent. A quiet warning that the world you see is fragile, and the spaces that appear empty may, in fact, be the most dangerous places of all. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some truths are not buried, they are simply erased. For decades, the official narrative surrounding Provisional Zone 734, the site of the incident with no survivors and no damage, was a fortress of silence. A blank page in the history books, secured by layers of classification and official denial. But fortresses can be breached, not by force, but by a whisper from the inside. In 1998, a document surfaced on the nascent internet, posted to an obscure cryptography forum before being scrubbed. It was titled Terminal Memorandum, Project Nightingale, and it was attributed to a former field agent of a now-defunct intelligence directorate, a man allegedly dying from an unexplainable neurological disorder. The memo was our first real glimpse into the human cost of the cover-up. It wasn't a confession, it was a warning. The agent, writing under the pseudonym Cassian, described being part of the second wave response team. The first wave never reported back. He wrote not of a scene of destruction, but of profound, unnatural stillness. The air itself felt wrong, the memo reads. Static, heavy, like the moment after a lightning strike, but the moment never ends. He described entering homes where half-eaten meals sat on tables, televisions flickered with dead air, and cars were parked in driveways, keys in the ignition. There were no bodies, no blood, no sign of struggle. There was only absence. Cassian's account deviates from a simple missing persons case when he details the psychological toll on his team. Within 72 hours of entering the zone, his colleagues began reporting severe auditory hallucinations, describing a low, pervasive hum that felt like it was inside their own skull. They suffered from temporal distortions, losing track of hours, even days. The memo chillingly states, "We weren't investigating a place. We were being investigated by it. The silence was an active force. It listened, it learned." The most disturbing part of the document concerns what they didn't find. Scans for radiation, chemical agents, and biological pathogens all came back negative. The zone was, by all scientific measures, perfectly safe. Yet, every member of Cassian's team, himself included, would later develop rare, aggressive forms of prion disease or neurological decay. His final terrifying hypothesis was that Project Nightingale wasn't a weapon in the conventional sense. It was a frequency, a signal broadcast that didn't destroy matter, but simply unwrote consciousness. It targeted the very pattern of human thought, erasing the occupant, while leaving the vessel and the environment untouched. He ended the memo with a plea. Do not try to understand it. Do not look for it. To study it is to tune into its frequency. And once it knows you're listening, it will never stop broadcasting. The memo was dismissed as a hoax, but recently declassified medical records confirm a cluster of intelligence officers from that era all died from statistically impossible neurological conditions. The whisper from the dying agent had become a scream from the grave. Following the initial containment, Provisional Zone 734 was placed under the most secretive and persistent surveillance program of the Cold War, a program that continues to this day. Codenamed Argus I, its mission was not to see what was happening, but to see what wasn't. For over 50 years, a constellation of satellites has kept a tireless watch, using every spectrum of light and energy to dissect the silent town from orbit. The resulting data archive is one of the most anomalous collections of information in existence. High-resolution optical imagery, taken daily, reveals a town frozen in time. A child's bicycle lies on a lawn, untouched by rust or decay. Curtains and windows remain in the exact same position, year after year. The paint on the houses does not peel. The asphalt on the roads does not crack. There is no weather erosion. This is not just a lack of human activity. It is a suspension of natural law. Synthetic aperture radar scans, which can penetrate cloud cover and map terrain with millimeter precision, show zero structural degradation. Thermal imaging is even more bizarre. The zone exhibits a flat, uniform temperature, slightly below the ambient temperature of the surrounding landscape, regardless of the time of day or season. It is a cold spot on the map, a thermal void that absorbs the sun's energy without radiating it back. There is no heat signature from wildlife because there is no wildlife. Ornithologists have confirmed that birds will actively fly miles around the designated airspace. Ground sensors, covertly placed by special operations teams, who are only allowed to remain within the perimeter for minutes at a time, have detected no seismic activity, no insect life, no microbial decay in the soil. It is a sterile environment on a scale that should not be possible in nature. The most classified data comes from experimental spectroscopic analysis satellites. These were designed to detect atmospheric composition, looking for telltale signs of chemical weapons manufacturing. When pointed at Zone 734, the readings are consistently flagged as inconclusive. The light passing through the air above the town is subtly, yet measurably, distorted. It's as if the space itself is fundamentally different. The Argus I archive tells a terrifying story. The incident, with no survivors, didn't just remove the people, it fundamentally altered the reality of the location. It placed the town in a state of perpetual stasis, a photograph that never fades. The question the intelligence community has been asking for decades is not what happened to the people, but is the phenomenon contained, or is it merely dormant? The unchanging town, viewed from the cold, clinical distance of space, is not a relic of the past. It's a loaded weapon, waiting. For many researchers in the fringe community, the incident with no survivors was a historical anomaly, a ghost of the Cold War. But in 2012, that ghost appeared to walk again. Deep in the remote mountains of Serbia, a private European consortium established the Zlatibor Research Outpost, a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to studying atmospheric physics. It housed 12 scientists and support staff. On May 8, 2012, the outpost went silent. All communication links, satellite, radio, and landline, severed simultaneously. The facility's automated systems, however, continued to broadcast a green status. Power was stable, life support was nominal, and there were no security breaches. A response team comprised of private security contractors was dispatched. What they found was a chilling echo of Provisional Zone 734, updated for the 21st century. The outpost was immaculate. Laptops were open, displaying half-written emails. Mugs of coffee, still warm, sat on desks. In the recreation room, a game of chess was left mid-move. There were no signs of violence, no forced entry, no struggle. All 12 personnel were gone. Their personal effects, wallets, phones, and passports were all left behind. The entire facility was locked from the inside. The Serbian government, with quiet assistance from international intelligence agencies, sealed the area. But before the blackout was complete, one of the contractors leaked his helmet cam footage. The video is unnerving. It shows the team methodically sweeping through the pristine, silent facility. The only sounds are their own breathing and the crackle of their radios. The tension is palpable as they check empty dormitories and silent laboratories. But the most significant piece of evidence was not what the footage showed, but what it captured on its audio track. When forensic audio analysts enhanced the recording, they isolated a faint, extremely low-frequency hum, almost subliminal, that was present throughout the entire outpost. It was a sound the contractors themselves hadn't consciously noticed. When this audio signature was compared against classified acoustic data recovered from the perimeter of Zone 734 in the 1970s, the patterns matched with a terrifying 98.7% accuracy. The Serbian echo, as it became known, proved that the phenomenon was not a one-time event. It was not tied to a specific time or place. It was a reproducible effect. This raised the horrifying possibility that the incident was not the result of a stationary physical weapon, but a methodology. A set of instructions, a specific frequency, a form of knowledge that, once understood, could be deployed anywhere. The immaculate, empty Serbian outpost served as a stark, modern reminder. The silent event that left no survivors and no damage was not a closed chapter of history. It was a threat that had learned to travel. We stand at the edge of an abyss of understanding. The incident, with no survivors and no damage, is not a conventional mystery. It's not a whodunit, but a what is it? After decades of secret analysis, leaked documents, and chilling echoes, we are no closer to a definitive answer. We are simply left with a collection of terrifying, irreconcilable facts. Let us review the dominant theories, each more unsettling than the last. The first is the neurological weapon hypothesis, as suggested by the dying agent, Cassian. This theory posits the existence of a signal, a resonance weapon that targets the specific bioelectric frequencies of human consciousness. It doesn't kill the body, it deletes the person. It is a silent, invisible, and terrifyingly efficient tool of erasure, the perfect crime, leaving behind no evidence of a crime at all, only a stage with the actors missing. The second is the localized reality collapse theory. This idea, born from the fringes of theoretical physics, suggests that under specific, unknown conditions, a pocket of space-time can fundamentally break down. The laws of physics as we know them, including causality and the passage of time, could become suspended. In this model, the people of Zone 734 didn't die or disappear. They simply ceased to exist in our continuum, trapped in a bubble of non-reality where nothing ever changes. The town's physical stasis lends a chilling credibility to this fantastic notion. The third, and perhaps most disturbing, is the external contact theory. This is not about little green men, but about something far more alien. It hypothesizes that humanity stumbled upon, or was subjected to, an intelligence or force so far beyond our comprehension that its mere presence or communication was lethal to our form of consciousness. Like a two-dimensional being trying to perceive a three-dimensional object, our minds simply could not process the interaction and were wiped. The silence of the town is not emptiness. It is the footprint of something incomprehensible. Every official file on the unresolved event, as it's internally designated, remains classified at the highest level. The lack of damage is the core of the terror. A bomb is understandable. A plague is horrifying, but logical. An event that leaves everything perfectly intact, yet utterly empty, defies our most basic assumptions about safety and existence. It suggests that the greatest threat may not be one that destroys our cities, but one that silently hollows them out, leaving behind perfect, beautiful tombs. The story of Provisional Zone 734 is not over. It is a persistent, low-frequency hum beneath the noise of our world, a constant reminder that we may not know what forces govern our reality or how fragile our place within it truly is. The ultimate question is not what happened back then, but when and where the silence will fall next.